Hi, welcome back to CS170. So we're picking up on week 13, chapter 11. So last class we talked about, or last lecture, we talked a bit about crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. So uh, this is just talking about electronic payments. Probably something that maybe is picking up more recently in the US. Um, Other countries have picked up on electronic payments, maybe a little bit faster, maybe with recent COVID situation, maybe the electronic payments uh, the adoption has been more quick because people don't want to exchange cash. So you're seeing more of that, among other things. So if you look over here on this side where it says electronic payments, you'll see the different things that probably most of you are kind of familiar with, right? Probably Apple Pay. But there's different places like, if you do a lot of stuff at Starbucks, you can kind of load things up and pay off of there, among other things. An earlier player in all of this is PayPal, right? So they're doing stuff. Um, some of you may be doing stuff with Zelle, maybe with Venmo and whatnot. So it's a couple of different players, or I should say more than a couple getting into here. You'll notice on here, there's Bitcoin among, it's probably the more well-known of the currencies. So it's a bit different. So it kind of technically falls under electronic payments, but if you look at something like PayPal, Apple Pay, or whatever, ultimately they're facilitating a transaction. They may have a store of your currency, mostly US dollars, but it could be other currencies also. And so they're kind of moving money around. People may leave balances in let's say PayPal or whatever. Whereas Bitcoin, that in and of itself is a currency, right? So that's a bit of a different a distinction when you talk about electronic payments, right? So Bitcoin itself is a currency, and just like US dollars or something like that. And so there could be different platforms that will transact in Bitcoin as a currency, just like US dollar or something like that. So Bitcoin itself, you wouldn't consider that to be like under electronic payments in the same way like PayPal or Apple Pay, something like that. So it's just a distinction. It's kind of a notable distinction. So you really shouldn't consider Bitcoin in the same vein as like these other things, which are basically facilitating mostly US dollars, right? But like I said, it also facilitates other currencies also. And Bitcoin itself is essentially a currency or store of value. Some people may look at it that way. So that could be transacted on other platforms. So for example, like let's say Venmo, you might purchase some Bitcoin on Venmo, let's say. So so there's that distinction there. And just let me step back a second. When I kind of introduced this chapter 11 here, I kind of drew an analogy to all the stuff that you learned earlier in the semester, kind of learning about like, the evolution of technology, the history of key people, like talking about the census, talking about, early computers, like how essentially the computer architecture looks like, abstraction and whatnot. So, I think you can say, well, okay, well, what does this mean in terms of like your exam? So I kind of look at things like this. You kind of say, people might say, can you give me an example of crowdsourcing, or give me an example of crowdfunding, right? So you understand the definition, right? So it's just like a vocabulary test. So you understand what that is, and then just be able to give an example, right, on these particular things. So if you're trying to study for these type of things for the exam, that's how I would look at it. And it's kind of laid out that way in the book. So it's fairly easy for you to look at in the book and just kind of study for it and just look at it that way. Understand what the term is, like a vocabulary test, and be able to give some examples of it. I'm sure you can go in there, you can do Google on things like this, like crowdsourcing, and you'll see a whole bunch of different type of examples. Same thing with crowdfunding, or you can just use the examples that we have here, okay? And you might just understand how it works, right? So for example, Wikipedia, I kind of drew the analogy to its predecessor, which is an encyclopedia, right? Something like Waze. I mean, like I said, probably most of you who drive a car know what Waze is. So just kind of know like how exactly does it do crowdsourcing, right? How does it like draw information, which is basically collective of people that contribute to it, right? In this way, in Wikipedia, there's a collective of people contributing articles, right? Ways, there's people basically talking about speed traps, right? Things like that. So just a little aside here to help you study for the exam, okay? Yeah, this is just more talking about different types of collaboration. So with the internet, it basically facilitates these type of things where people from wherever, all around the world, as long as you have connectivity to the internet, and these days it's relatively good, performance in terms of like, the capability to stream video and whatnot. So the ability to do things like videos together. We all do Zoom probably, or WebEx or whatever. So all of that is out there, and people are collaborating with that. And so that's why there's a lot of people that work from home. Like if you're doing certain types of work, you're able to do that because you're able to facilitate people from sitting anywhere around the world to work together, right? So that's the idea of like what the technology enables, okay? So let me just continue on here to the next topic, which is filter bubbles. So you probably know this, where whatever you do, right? Whether you have your phone, and your phone is kind of listening to what you're saying, and magically you get articles that relate to what you just talked about, or you get like ads that come across to you about what you just talked about. Or you look at some emails that you sent out. Maybe you sent out some emails and then it looked at your emails and then came up with some information to help put, certain types of products in front of you. Of course, if you look at certain web pages, whatever, like basically almost any type of activity that you do on the computer will help whoever has access to that information to do whatever. Right, it could be to sell quote unquote appropriate products to you. In this case, we're talking about in filter bubbles, it's talking about putting certain types of, let's say, news or content in front of you. So it's one of those type of things where like once you kind of build up what you like, it's going to be reinforcing. It's going to be self-reinforcing, right? It's going to kind of feed back upon itself, right? So you keep on clicking on something, then they're going to feed you more of it. Then you keep on clicking on it, right? And then it just keeps on saying, oh yeah, this guy must really love whatever, right? Dolphins or something, right? And it'll just keep on like feeding that to you. So, in the old days, right, you would get like maybe a newspaper, right? And maybe the newspaper, there's always some bias one way or the other, but you try to be somewhat fairly balanced, right? Or objective, right? So it may be that you may lean one way or the other in terms of whatever end of the political spectrum or whatnot. But regardless, you would still at least see that there's other other perspectives, other views, even though you may lean one way or the other, okay? But with technology, and where it constantly is striving to customize what it puts in front of you, what the computer puts in front of you based on your likes, what you like to read or what you like to do, then the scope of what gets put in front of you gets narrower and narrower, right? Versus like in old days where you basically, it wasn't customized to you. It basically, it provided like a broader spectrum of information to you, right? So that's what filter bubble is about, right? I'm not going to read this. I mean, I think you guys all know how to read this, right? So, but basically what I just described is how this idea of, technology basically narrowly focusing whatever your interests are, and then that's all it keeps on feeding to you. It prevents you or kind of hinders you from, being exposed to different types of viewpoints or opinions. Okay, so that's the basic idea when we look at filter bubbles. Okay. So this one is just talking about, I mean, you all know how Netflix kind of puts together, and same thing as Amazon or whatever, right? It basically puts up certain things that it thinks you'll be interested in, right? In this case, what you want to watch, right? And Amazon is what you want to buy, right? So it'll put these type of things in front of you, and it's based on information, a whole lot of information on your habits, and that's what it puts in front of you. Okay, so that's an example here, like the algorithms that are used to put certain things in front of you, right? And companies like Facebook have gotten into some bit of trouble for things like this, but they're not the only ones, right? Everyone, Google, Amazon, whatever, right? There's a whole bunch of this type of stuff going on, and for some people that's great, right? You get this customized experience, and it's tailored to your taste, right? But there is like a downside to it, which is what this filter bubble idea is all about. Okay. So these are just like, kind of emphasizing the points I just mentioned, right? Namely, this idea algorithm. What is it that you want to hear, right? And you can see these are different kind of topics that people have maybe strong feelings about, right? And it'll go one way or the other. Okay, and that's what gets constantly put in front of you. Okay. Yeah, so the Onion, right? It's basically something that you can go there. You've probably seen it. They always have this whole thing with the April Fools and whatnot. They had a number, and if you do Google on it, you'll probably see there's a number of situations where actually people couldn't tell the difference, right, between like satire and like real news, right? So they kind of, however they came across these articles, right, just got served up to them, and not everybody validates where they get information from. So there's been a number of cases where it's almost like people just believe it as real news, and then they react to it. So that's something that you just want to be cognizant of. So just remember this idea of what a filter bubble is and why it's a little bit of a danger or a challenge with technology. So for all the good things that you get in terms of like customized experience and whatnot, a filter bubble is one of the challenges that we face with the technology right now. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and cut another video for the other sections down here, right? So again, I'm trying to make these videos nice and short so you can pick them up, okay? So I'll be back with another video shortly.